Okay guys, so next step we're going to install the camshaft bearings. So if you notice when you get cam bearings taken out or when you get some new ones, you're going to have 4 of them that look like this. They just have one single oil passage hole, the feed hole. Alright, and then you're going to have one bearing that has 2. So this one is always the front one. This one sits, I have the block upside down now, but this one sits, if this is normally 12 o'clock, when the block is sitting upright, the one hole sits right there at 12 o'clock, and the other hole is going to sit over there on this side. So it's normally at like a 12 and about a 3:30. 12 and 3 o'clock, 3:30ish. So that is how you're going to want to install them. This is how they should come out of the block if they're original, and how they should go back in to provide the best oil wedge. I know there's an annular groove that goes all the way around on these small blocks, on most of them that I've ever seen anyway. And that would provide oil no matter where the cam bearing orientation is. But to get the best oil wedge, you want to have it so that the oil flows through these to the camshaft at the highest point of, I guess, load. And for that, with the direction of rotation of the camshaft is actually going to be at the 3:30 position when the block is upright. So that means on this side over here when the block is upside down. So the only exception is, other than that one has 2 holes, the rest of them all have 1 hole. So the next 3 that you put in are all going to be aligned here in that 3:30 position, except for the very last bearing. The very last cam bearing is going to be facing straight down. It's going to be like that, and that's because of the extra holes at the back, I believe, as well as having the distributor gear there. I think that has something to do with it, but either way, that is from all the research and from all the engine builders that I've seen do it, is with this oil hole clocked to 12 o'clock at the very back of the block. Okay, so I know the lighting isn't going to be the easiest to see, but we're going to start working our way from rear of the block forward. That way you just don't damage any of the bearing surfaces as you're driving them in. So you want to start at the back, and you have the plug out at the back there, and you want to clock. And these have to go in dry, by the way. You don't want any lubrication on these because they will spin in the block, and that is going to cause a lot of extra heat and wear, and probably going to throw your camshaft right out. So you just line it up the back of the block, and I'll get the tool set up. So setting up the tool, we got the long shaft, the cone. The cone is very crucial to this if you want to do this properly. And we have our threaded insert with our big shim washer there. And the second smallest expandable sleeve. So now we will simply slide this through. Careful not to nick any of the bearing surfaces. You don't want to have any nicks on them. You want to make sure they're all clean and smooth so that you don't damage any of the bearings going in, because that would be a definite problem. So I have the oil hole clocked to the bottom there. It is right where it needs to be. This is probably the trickiest part of this, is trying to get everything just lined up correctly. Take our wrench, we'll just tighten this up until we get it close to the size that we need. Keep that there. And the way I like to do this is pretty simple, is if you take the oil hole and you clock it to be the same as one of these here. So if you had it on the oil hole to be lined up with that gap, It's not staying in this orientation, but it's just to help you keep everything centered when it does go in. So we will tighten this up, get it to expand to the bearing. So there, that's lined up with the gap on the spreadable sleeve. And you don't want to over tighten this because you don't want to put any extra pressure on the outside here. So just snug is good enough. And then you take this, rotate it around until the other one is straight up and down. So this is directly opposite of the other part of that collet. And you line it up into your where the bearing sits. And it's very important to take your time with this, not rush it. Just get it done right the first time and make sure it looks all good. You can see with the cap off of the back of the block right through the hole. Make sure that looks like it's lined up at 12 o'clock. And it looks to me, yep, I can see the oil hole and I can see the gap that I lined up the bearing with, so everything should go in smoothly and straight through. Now we'll just tap it in. Making sure we're going in square. And it looks good to me, other than I accidentally turned the sleeve, so it's going to be a little loose on the bearing itself now. But that's okay. You can still access the nut from behind. And just get everything snugged up. That way it can't slip. So I already know that the oil hole is clocked. I don't have to worry about that. The bearing didn't move any in that direction. And now it's just a matter of driving it through. Now knowing when to stop is also important. You don't want to drive it through too far, but you want to make sure it's in there enough. So the best way to do that is just to loosen this off, pull it back out, and if you look on, if you were able to see on the inside, I'll take a picture of it and add it as well. You can see that is the oil hole there in the bearing, and then up above is directly where it needs to be aligned to. So we'll push that forward until it slots into that. Put our wrench back on the end. Tighten this up. Make sure we're nice and square. And drive it through a bit further. Loosen it off. And we've still got a bit more to go. Like I said, it's better to stop, check, and make sure you're still where you need to be rather than go too far, because there's no real way you're gonna fix that without taking it off the stand and tapping it out from the other direction, which could also ruin the bearing itself. So we've got this just about flush in there, and I do see where the hole sits. It looks like we are right into that groove there, right where it needs to sit. And with that, we have our first cam bearing installed. So now I'll just repeat the process for the rest of them. Okay, so we got the next bearing in here, another one with just a single hole. And we are going to drop it in to the engine. And this time we have to clock it this direction. We need it at the 330 mark approximately. So it's definitely harder to see. But again, if you line it up with that gap on the collet, take the wrench and tighten it up. We want to make sure that's snug up against the rings while the collet is tight. Okay, now that's tight. It's good all the way around, nice and snug all the way around, so it'll go in straight, not on an angle. Make sure we have no grease or anything on it. Good, and now we just want to take that. And so we know if this is technically the 6 o'clock mark in the normal engine orientation, sitting upright. So if that's 6, and we know the bottom is 12, then we know if we see the next quarter of the collet, that means that hole is now at 3. So if we turn it just slightly away from where 3 is, it'll be at the 330 mark. And that is exactly where we're going to start it to go into the engine. So we got it lined up there. Take it to the 330 mark approximately. Have everything all snug in there and tap it in. Now again, can't really see where it is, so we're just going to loosen it off a hair, pull it back through, and check how far we have to go until we're in that groove. So we're almost there, we're just going to give it a little bit more. And the way I'm gauging this is just by looking at where the collet sits and where the bearing hole sits compared to that annular groove. And the groove is wider than the hole in the bearing, so you do have some room for error with that. You don't have to be super precise, which is very nice and very forgiving. So if I just take this zip tie end here and I stick it through the hole, and I can go right down in. So that means I know if I can go in and out of that hole, then I am in that groove. And I can do it the same with the back one. In and out of that hole. So I'm in and out of that groove. And if you weren't, lined up, you'd take your bearing and it would say that you're not against the slot. You'd be trying to put it in that hole and you'd feel it bottom out right away. But if you feel it travel into that hole, and you feel some depth there, it's more than 1/8 of an inch of depth that you'll feel. Then you are good with that bearing's placement and you shouldn't have to move it any further. I'm just gonna grab a light and see if I can see it at all. I don't know if I can. Yep, you can see just the edge slide through that hole if you're looking on the right angle with a light. So because I just see the edge there just slightly, I'm just going to give it one extra tap over. Even though it is in the groove, I'm just going to be basically centering it up in that groove by providing a little extra tap. There. That's all it needed, like 1 millimeter over for me to be happy with it being perfectly in the center. So we'll take the third bearing, drop it in, same thing. These are kind of finicky to get in sometimes. There we go. Slide it over the collar, line it up with that there gap in the sleeve, push it up, grab the wrench, and tighten while holding everything nice and flush, nice and square. Just tighten the rod to the nut. Good and snug, can't go anywhere. Now we want to remember, turn this to the 330-ish right there. So we have the best oil wedge possible and drive it through. Now I went straight until I couldn't see the bearing on this edge here anymore, just the same as I can't see it there, because that is where the oil hole and the groove lined up before. And if you can see it right there, it's fully within that bearing journal surface. And I'll grab the zip tie once again. The hole is lined up where I want it to be at the 330 position. Zip tie in the hole. Okay, zip tie is in the hole, and I have a good amount. You can see that is where it's bottomed out, and that is how far it comes out. So there is a good amount of movement in there. Lots of room for the oil to flow. Again, I'm just going to give this one extra tap. Just personal preference. Remember to keep that cone nice and snug to the inside of your first cam journal. And one extra tap. Yeah. That satisfies me. Yep, moved it over like barely 1 millimeter. You'd never guess this is my first time doing cam bearings in this engine. So we got this one lined up with our gap over here. Take the light out of the way. Make sure you guys can see this good. I guess I'll pull it out first, so I'll just make sure that you guys can see. This is the gap I'm talking about on the sleeve, the collet, and I line that up there, tighten this nut up, and then I rotate this until this is at the facing upwards, and that's the 3 o'clock position, so just a hair that way, and that's 3:30, or just put it off the diameter of the hole from this one and rotate it 90 degrees to your left, counterclockwise, and you'll have that lined up at the 3:30 position. We'll stick it in. Line it up, push the cone in. Get it nice and snug. Make sure that we're good all the way around. And line up that mark with the 12 o'clock position. And we'll drive this bearing through. We'll loosen it off. We verify we are definitely within where we need to be. Grab my zip tie again. The hole looks like it's clocked to the 3:30 position here. And yep, the zip tie has almost a 1/4 inch of movement, probably like 3/16 of an inch of movement through that oil hole. So we're good and lined up there. Now it's time to do our last one. And our last one, if you remember what I said, so with the engine upside down, this is the 12 o'clock, this is the 6, and this is the 3, and this is the 9, just if it's upside down. So this one is going towards the ground, and this one is going towards our 3:30 position, same as all the rest. So we line that up. Line it up on our sleeve. Nice and snug. You got good, nice flush, tight edge all the way around, so it will go in square and not on an angle, not crooked. So you can see this one is lined up for where the 12 o'clock position will be. And this one, you can see that that's not exactly at the 3, but it is at the 3:30 area. That's the same as all the rest of them, except for the back one that's also a 12 o'clock. So for this one, we just line up top and bottom. Make sure those are nice and concentric. And this one you do have to balance on your own because there is nothing that's going to support you. So starting it square is going to be a little more difficult, but not impossible. Not entirely hard. And it's just a matter of keeping it right where you need it. Move it around so you can see this better. So we've just got our edge lined up there. Make sure she's in nice and square. And you definitely want to make sure this bearing goes in past the front face surface here, because that face surface is where your little bushing or your Torrington bearing will sit against the back of the cam gear. So we're definitely into the block there now. And I can see that hole actually is lined up perfectly on this edge right here. So I'll bring you off the stand. I have a rigged up stand here for the camera so it doesn't fall forward. So now you can see what I mean about that hole being lined up right there. And the other one is at the 330, and if you look all the way through, the rest of them will all show a hole at the 330 except for the back, which will be at the 12 o'clock position. I know it's very hard to see, but in real life, with your own eyes, you'll be able to see it much better, much more clearly. And that is how you do cam bearings in a small block shev.